guys, we are back. Comptia A Plus Certification Exam Core 1 Objectives. This is for our test 220-1101. Remember, in order for you to become A Plus certified, you need to go ahead and pass two tests, one of those being the 1101. So we're actually moving along pretty well here. If you've been keeping up with the videos, we've gone ahead and we went through what would be 1.0 mobile devices. We talked about 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Today, we are hitting some new ground. We're going to talk about 2.0 networking. And believe it or not, guys, this here is going to be an extremely critical component, not only for you to pass your test, but if you want to be a highly sought after, competent IT professional. Okay, because networking is huge. Okay, knowing how networks work, knowing the OSI model, knowing the TCP/IP model, going ahead and being able to know and perhaps even visualize exactly how networks work and communicate, you can become an asset to a company, to yourself, so on and so forth. So I'm really going to harp on this particular section, especially the 2.1, because not only is it easy points on the exam, if you can memorize, okay, you don't have to be Einstein over here. If you can memorize a port number and what it and its functionality, you can get simple, easy points, and that's just 1 point closer to going ahead and passing your exam. So that's one of the reasons why I'm harping on this. The second part is, hey, you can have 100 certifications, but if you don't know what you're talking about and if you don't understand or comprehend the material, you're not going to be any good to anybody. Okay, so the purpose of the certification is not only it's basically a demonstration that you have passed and you're a qualified. And you have a certain level of knowledge. Okay, there's a threshold of knowledge that needs to be accomplished and acquired in order for you to go ahead and pass your certification. But on the other hand of that, if you want to take your education and your IT to a higher degree, you need to comprehend this material and understand how protocols work and understand, hey, when I troubleshoot something, it's perhaps maybe X, Y, and Z. And in order for you to do that, you need to comprehend this material. So hopefully I emphasize the importance of this particular video. Obviously, all the videos are important because that's literally CompTIA is telling us this material. You need to be, you're going to be responsible for answering any of these questions if once you're in the testing situation. But me personally, I would highly, highly pay attention to this particular section when it comes to the 2.1, and more so when it comes to, in general, networking. Remember, they have different other certifications. Technically, I am CCNA certified. That's for the Cisco Certified Network Associate. And believe it or not, a lot of this material, okay, a lot of this material is in the material for the CCNA. A lot of this material, if you want to go ahead and get a better or a higher caliber certification, which the next step would be Networking Plus, a lot of this material is in that certification. Okay, so hopefully I emphasize the importance of this video and you honestly do watch it all the way to the end. And even if you don't, at least you can comprehend, hey, this is rather important stuff. So let's go ahead and get straight to the presentation here. This right here, we're going to go ahead and talk about what would be 2.1. So let's wait for, there it is. So we're talking about 2.1, compare and contrast transmission control protocol, TCP, and user datagram protocol, UDP. Ports, protocols, and their purposes. Okay, so we are on section 2.1. This is a highly critical aspect of not only CompTIA Plus, but IT in general. And remember, we are on the section of 2.0. And I know I already went ahead and emphasized the importance, but once again, 2.0 networking. This is an extremely important part, not just for this test, but if you wish to have a higher level of knowledge and comprehension of the IT world. So let's go straight to it. Okay, so here what we have is basically two models that have gone ahead and basically they've taken over the IT world, so to speak. Okay, this model, which is another word for framework, Okay, this allows us to have a visual representation of how data moves from one computer to another computer. And each layer is responsible for a particular job. And how it does its job, it's based upon protocols. On the left, we have the OSI model. On the right, we have the TCP/IP model. And as you can see, the only difference is the TCP/IP model has been slightly condensed. Okay, instead of it having 7 layers, it has 4 layers, but the idea is still the same. Okay. A lot of people refer to the OSI model. Okay. If they're saying, hey, we're having a layer 5 issue. Okay. You would start from the bottom. One, two, three, four, five. Oh, okay. Seems like they're having a session layer issue. Hey, it was just a layer 1 problem. Okay. We start from the bottom. One. Oh, okay. It was a physical. Oh, maybe the cable wasn't connected, or maybe the cable broke off, or what have you. Okay, so this is how in the world, network technicians would speak to themselves. This is how they would basically categorize their thoughts, their troubleshooting processes, and whatnot. The nomic, I have a hard word pronouncing that word, but nonetheless, what I like to remember this when it comes to the OSI model is all people seem to not date princesses. Okay, all people seem to not date princesses. Okay, I've seen a bunch of other ones, so on and so forth. Another one was all people seem to need data processing. Okay, that's another one. You can come up with one on your own, so you can go ahead and memorize this OSI model, because this model, like I mentioned before, it's a framework. Okay, and the purpose of this presentation was the 2.1, which is to discuss the idea of TCP and UDP. So everything that we're going to be talking about today, for the most part, is going to be right here on the transport layer. Okay, on the transport layer is going to be the majority of our conversation today. Okay, so we're not talking about physical wires, we're not talking about MAC addresses, we're not talking about IP addresses. We're talking about the layer right above that, which is the transport layer, which deals with the transmission control protocol and a user datagram protocol. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to show you this slide, and I'm going to show you this slide. Okay, we're going to go ahead and talk about protocols and ports and what is the difference between them. Okay, it's quite simple. Let's not make it more complicated than it has to be. A port, literally think of it as a ship. Okay, how would you organize ships coming in? Hey, what are you bringing in? I'm bringing in steel. What are you bringing in? I'm bringing in copper. What are you bringing in? I'm bringing in aluminum. Oh, okay. Steel 1, aluminum 2, copper 3. Go to your port. Okay, it's as simple as that. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's literally a numerical label, okay, that is assigned to an application or process which helps direct traffic. And when you think of port, literally think of a ship and what their cargo is. And depending on their cargo, they are designated to a particular port. Okay, numerical label, port. Okay. Let's go on to what would be port numbers and categories. This right here, just realize that there's 65,535 ports. You have that broken down into 3 categories, which are known as well-known, registered, dynamic, and private ports. Okay, and that once again, the range is from 0 to 65,535. This is probably a number that you want to memorize. I like to think of this as 1, 2, 3. Okay, so well known is going to be 0 all the way to 1023. Registered ports, what's after 3, 4, 1204. Excuse me, 1024, all the way to 49,151. Okay, and dynamic private, it's 49,152 all the way to 65,535. Just think about it. Hey, as soon as you go ahead and you get your Comptia 8 Plus and you are entry level, what would be a good starting figure? Hey, 65,535 would be a good starting figure for entry level technician with the Comptia 8 Plus. Okay, so that's one way, a silly way to try to memorize these numbers. But the key point is that there's 3 categories. Okay, let's go on to protocols. Okay, if you were to go ahead and ask ChatGPT or ask Google Gemini or go ahead and look at your textbook definition of protocols, you're going to get a nice little lengthy paragraph that's going to tell you hey, this is a protocol. It's going to be in sophisticated language and whatnot. I like to keep things simple. When I think of protocols, I think of rules and regulations. Okay, regulations and rules is another word for protocols. Okay, so think of it as an official. Okay, an official basically has the whole rule book memorized in his brain, so to speak. That way, it knows how the game should go ahead and continue to play and function. Okay, protocols is another word for rules and regulations, which is different from ports, which we just learned is just a numerical label. Okay, so let's go ahead and we put both of those together. Hey, that aluminum that you're bringing in, you're going into port one. Hey, that copper that you brought in, you're going into port two. That steel, I think I might have messed it up already. It was steel goes to port one, it was copper goes to two, or aluminum goes to two, copper goes to three. But you know what I mean. Okay, so that that cargo has a designated port. Once it gets to the port, okay, once it gets to the port, that port is going to have a designated protocol. What's a protocol? It's a rule or a regulation. Okay, so once they're saying, hey, thank you for bringing in the steel, where's the paperwork? We're going to go ahead and weigh it. We have a specific fashion in which we go ahead and deload this cargo. Or we have a specific fashion on how we load this cargo. Okay, so that's the major difference between your protocols and your ports. Now, when we talk about TCP, pop quiz, do you guys remember what layer of the OSI model we are in when we're dealing with the transmission control protocol? That would be the transport layer 4. Remember, this right here should be in the back of your head. Okay, as an IT professional, more specifically for networking. But if you want to get ahead of the game, this is something you should memorize and always have in the back of your head every time you engage within a situation. Hey, where are we at? What are we dealing with? Okay, so let's go back to TCP, which now we know we're dealing with layer 4, and that is the transport layer. This is a rule and regulation. It's like a rule book that tells you if you're using this protocol, this is how we function, this is how we roll. We have a connection oriented, it's reliable delivery, it's flow control, it's error checking, congestion control. And one of the things I want you to get away from this particular video when it comes to TCP, it deals with three-way handshake. Okay, that's something that comes up a lot. Once you get into networking, you're going to have to know, hey, how does a three-way handshake work? You could always look that up, but for the Comptia A Plus at this point in time with this presentation, I just want to mention it. Okay, and what distinguishes TCP? Okay, it's slower, but it's more reliable. Okay, remember we are transport layer. We're transporting data packets within the network. Okay, and TCP is going to be slightly slower, but it's going to be more reliable. So that's like making sure that you get certified mail. You're making sure that your data packets, okay, your data has been delivered. Okay, that's the takeaway when it comes to TCP, which is different from UDP. UDP is User Datagram Protocol. Okay, I've heard this before, and I like to use this analogy. UDP is like you shoot it and you forget. You shoot it and you forget. Okay. In this case, it's connectionless. It's not reliable, but it's a lot faster, less overhead, right? When you have to start checking things over and over again, or you have to go ahead and establish connections, when you just shoot out the data, it's a lot faster. And obviously, the flaw, or rather the con of that, would be no error checking. So this is faster, but it's less reliable. So you have your TCP protocol, which is connection oriented, right? It's slower, it's more reliable. It makes sure that that data has been sent and received and it confirms it. And then you have UDP, okay, which is basically connectionless. It's faster, but it's less reliable. It just simply says, hey, I sent the message. I don't know if they got it or not. Not my problem. Next message. Hey, I sent the message. It's not my problem if they get it or not. I'm just sending the message. Okay. So that's the difference between TCP and UDP. Okay. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with TCP or if you're dealing with UDP. Why? Because that is still a component of the transport layer. Okay, when we're referring to either the OSI model or the TCP/IP model. Now let's go ahead and for those of you guys, if you guys have been studying for a while, or maybe you need a little break, this is actually where I would highly recommend you take a quick little 5 minute sip of coffee, what have you, because we're going to go over some extremely common protocols that you should know. And it's, if you have a pen and paper, if you have flashcards or what have you, this is something you definitely want to study. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, this is easy points, literally memorizing the port number and their name and what they do, okay, can literally get you easy points on the test. And it's something that you definitely want to go ahead and deal with. So for example, if they ask you to go ahead and configure a firewall, and your firewall is asking you, hey, what ports do you want to block, or what protocols do you want to block, this is where this information comes into play. Okay, so if you need to take a break, go ahead and take a break. If not, we're going to keep on going. Okay, so the very first one is called FTP, which is known as File Transfer Protocol. It is port 20/21, and the protocol is TCP. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It transfers files between a client and a server over a network. Okay, this is used for uploading and downloading files to and from a server. Mind you, this is more so with regards to the server already being in the actual local area network, the LAN. Okay, we have SSH, okay, which is Secure Shell. This is port 22. The protocol is TCP, and this provides a secure channel via encryption, authentication, and data integrity, among a few other things. But the key word that I want you to get from this is encryption. Okay, Secure Shell is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, it is secure. One of the ways that it secures the information is by the encryption of the information. So when you send things over a network, it goes ahead and it encrypts the data, and it's something that now it's more common practice, and it's almost like a standard, which you'll see, I believe, compared to the next one that's coming up, which this you can use for remote login. You can use this for file transfer. You can use this for tunneling. Okay, the next one, let's go on to Telnet. So Telnet is actually older technology. This is port 23, protocols TCP, and it's basically not secured. Okay, this is one way to go ahead and get remote access. You can telnet into a server using your command line and whatnot. Uh, I'm not sure why they add this, because it's something that we don't even use. But I think one of the reasons why they add it is just so you can have it in the back of your brain and know, hey, we used to use Telnet, and everything that we went ahead and transferred over our network used to be unsecured, which is something we don't want to do nowadays. Let's go on to the next one. SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. This is port 25. Okay, this is protocol is TCP, and out of this presentation, I have 3 email protocols, and the easiest way to distinguish all 3, I'll give you guys a heads up, okay, is this one out of the other 3 is responsible for sending emails between servers. So if you get a question, if they go ahead and give you 3 email protocols and they say, hey, I want you to pick one that's responsible for sending emails, okay, you would pick SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, okay, and we'll get to the other ones later on. DNS stands for Domain Name System. This is port number 53. The protocol is TCP and UDP. Out of all of them that we've talked about thus far, this one's the first one where you're actually using both TCP and UDP. The reason why you would use both TCP and UDP is because an application has a lot of things going on in the background. It has a lot of processing. It has a lot of steps, so to speak. So for one particular step, it might use TCP. For another particular step, it might use UDP. And that's basically built on the discretion of the individual who actually created the application. Okay, so just keep that in mind that some of these, it's not only going to just be TCP, it's not only going to be UDP. Sometimes you will have TCP and UDP. But nonetheless, DNS, really simple. It takes the website name and it converts it to an IP address. Humans speak with, depending on the human, I guess, but more than likely you are accustomed to the English language, which has an alphabet, and it uses that alphabet to make words such as www.internet.com. Computers, on the other hand, they use binary. Okay, so binary is their language. They use zeros and ones. So when in this case, let's just imagine, in this case, if you go ahead and tell a computer 127.198.1.1, okay, there's a server. Okay, there's a protocol DNS that takes this binary number and it goes ahead and converts it to, oh yeah, that's www.internet.com. That's what the human's telling us. Okay, so just keep that in mind. DNS, that would be for going ahead and converting um, what we use as the English language to binary IP addresses, or rather IP addresses, so the computer can go ahead and communicate and get you to the right website. DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. This is port number 67/68. Protocol is UDP. Okay, and this one's really simple. This one can save you a lot of time and money. Okay, network protocol that automatically assigns IP addresses and other network configurations. Imagine if you were working for a company that had 1,000 computers and you had to go to each individual computer and manually go ahead and input the IP address. That would not be efficient, effective, cost effective. That would be a bad day for you in the office. That'd be a bad day for your boss in the office. It's like all day he's just putting in IP addresses on this computer, when you can get something like a DHCP server where you can configure the DHCP server and say, hey, just use these IP addresses, and any computer that asks for one, just give them one. Okay, so that's what it does. Okay, it automatically assigns an IP address. That way you can go ahead and get on the network and be able to communicate with your computer buddies on the network. Okay, network protocol that automatically assigns IP addresses and other network configurations. Which brings us to word of the day. All right, one of my favorite sections when it comes to the presentation, because like I already mentioned, guys, it is highly critical and important for you to increase your IT vocabulary. The more you know, the more you grow. Okay, let's go on to the word of the day, which is networking. And I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but it's always good to look at the what I call sophisticated definition, technical definition. That way we can go ahead and know exactly what a network is. So on and so forth. Okay, I put networking. I should have put network, but nonetheless, networking in IT. Okay, refers to the process of interconnecting computer devices such as computers, servers, and network devices to enable the sharing of resources and communication. This involves creating a structured infrastructure using hardware, routers, switches, cables, and software, protocols, operating systems to facilitate the exchange of data. I already knew you knew what networking was. You already knew that I knew what networking was. But it's always good to go ahead and look at the formal definition, so to speak. Let's go on to the presentation. Now we're going to talk about HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This was the protocol that our internet was using ages ago. Okay, and this is on port 80 protocols TCP. This is used for transferring data on the World Wide Web. Defines how messages are formatted and transmitted. Right? Imagine if you had 100 companies and they decided to put their stuff on the internet, and each company had a different standard or a different format. Okay, that would be horrendous, right? Because depending on, in order for you to access their website, you would need to make sure that your computer speaks their protocol, or and vice versa. Okay, so going ahead and standardizing these protocols makes it easier for everyone who is on the web to go ahead and communicate, and HTTP is one of those. Okay, this basically has been replaced by one of the ones we're going to go ahead and talk about, but you should definitely know HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is port 80, and the protocol it uses is TCP. Let's go to POP3. I mentioned before that there was basically 3 email protocols that you should know well. This is the second one. Remember SMTP, which was port 25 and it used TCP. Now we're introduced to POP3, Post Office Protocol 3, and this is port 110. Protocols TCP. So this, compared to SMTP, this is actually responsible for receiving email. See, you have one protocol for sending email, you have one protocol for receiving email. Okay, and the major difference with POP3 that I want you to get away from this is that it's downloadable email. That means that the server sends it to the device, and once the server sends it to the device, right? Because you're receiving the email. You're receiving the email. It basically goes ahead and it downloads the email to that particular device and it deletes it from the server. Okay, which is very different from what we have today, where you can log into your online email from your phone, your laptop, your desktop, and that email's still there. So keep that in mind when it comes to POP3. Okay, this was the second out of the third email protocols that we're going to talk about today. And just remember, SMTP is the protocol sending email. POP3 is one of the protocols that's receiving emails, and it's downloadable. That means that it's once it's on the device, it deletes it from the server. If you try to log in with another device, it will no longer be there on the server. Okay, NetBIOS/NetBT. This is one of those other old protocols that we don't necessarily use nowadays, but Comptia wants us to know it. So network basic input/output system. This is port 137/139. It uses TCP and UDP. And now, as I already mentioned, they call it legacy protocol, basically names computers and shares resources. Largely been replaced by Active Directory. So that's a fun note. Let's go to the next one. IMAP. Okay, Internet Mail Access Protocol. Here's the third one for the email protocols. This one here, the IMAP, it is a port number 143, protocols TCP, and this is responsible for receiving email. The difference between IMAP and POP3 is that IMAP doesn't delete the email from the server, which allows an individual to connect to the server with multiple devices and still have their email. Okay, so if they bring that up, and even if they don't bring that up, at least you know if someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, every time I try to log into the server, I can only get my email on my phone." Yeah, let me think. What protocols are we using? Oh, maybe you're using a POP3. Let me double check and confirm. This is why knowing these protocols is extremely important. Knowing how they function will just make your life easier when it comes to diagnostics. Okay, so just remember we have SMTP, which was port 25. We had POP3, which was port 110. And now we're talking about IMAP, which is port 143. POP3, IMAP is responsible for receiving the email. SMTP was responsible for sending the email. All right, let's go on to the next one, which is SNMP. SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. Exactly what it sounds like. This deals with port 161 and 162. Protocol is UDP, and Simple Network Management Protocol. What do you think it does? It manages a network, and it's simple, and it's a protocol. Used for monitoring and managing network devices, it allows network admin to collect information about network devices. Okay, let's go on to LDAP, okay, which stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. This is port number 389. Protocols it uses is TCP/UDP. We already talked about this. Sometimes when an application is complex and it's doing multiple things, it's beneficial to have certain things doing TCP and certain things doing UDP, and it all comes together as one application. What LDP is responsible for, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is accessing and managing directory information used to store, search, and modify information about individuals, organizations, and resources. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And this is basically if you open up a web browser today, 90% chance, more than likely, you're going to be using HTTPS. HTTP, remember, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Now they just added the S, which makes it secure. This is dealing with port 443, protocols TCP. It's the secure version of HTTP. Okay, so that means that it allows for your web browsing, so to speak, to be encrypted. Okay, so they just added the S, makes hypertext transfer protocols more secure. SMB, server message block. Okay, and they also had the /CIFS, um, which stands for Common Internet File System. So just remember, this is used for file and print sharing. Okay, server message block used for file and print sharing. If you need to share a file, if you need to go ahead and maybe share a printer, so okay, and that brings us to our very last one, which is RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. This is in port 3389, 3389. protocol is TCP, and this is used to provide a graphical user interface, the GUI session over a network connection to remote control a computer. Okay, this is something for especially if you're looking and your next goal for a job would be help desk. If an individual's having trouble with their computer and you are trying to remotely log into their computer to make sure that you can help them out, but you might be having a problem with that, this is something you would want to look into is like, hey, are you RDP? You probably wouldn't ask them that, but you would want to know in the back of your head, hey, I wonder if their computer is would allow me to go ahead and remotely log in to their computer. Okay, and this is that protocol that would be used, RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, port 3389. The protocol uses is TCP. Okay, and it's used to provide a graphical user interface GUI session over a network connection to remote control a computer.